and giving us this time. Well, the first thing we would like is for you to provide a brief description of the concept and evolution of robots. We want to focus our article on robots and ethics.
Well, I'm not sure how brief I can make it. The original term robot came from a play by a Czech named Karel Čapek. It was called Rossum's Universal Robots. And I don't know, 1910s, 1920s, I don't know which. It's not a very good play, but it was the first time that robots, and the word robot actually means slave or worker in Czech. What's interesting is, at the end, sorry to tell you if you want to see the play, everybody dies. So it's the first time the word robot was used, it killed off all of humanity. Because they didn't like being slaves, which kind of makes sense, right? If you get smart enough and you don't want to be a slave, why not kill your masters, right? Isn't that a common, didn't the gladiators do that as well? But anyway, then later Isaac Asimov, 40s and 50s, came up with the term in his very interesting and important novels and short stories, the word robotics. Robotics, in that phrase, meant a science, so it was actually a discipline. He was calling it an area of scientific study before it ever existed as a scientific study. And he posed initially 3 laws of robots, which basically, I don't know if I can get them all right, but basically it said you are not to harm a human being, in essence. You are to take and listen to human beings, do what they tell you, and you are to protect yourself. Those were basically that. He later added a zeroth law, which says you are to protect humanity as well too. So you can't harm humanity. And that one comes first and the others follow, so they're in an order of precedence. Anyway, they were good literary devices. They helped us understand what's wrong with trying to create simple rules to deal with ethical situations. And in the meantime, robots were really starting to grow. This is not that brief, but it's hopefully along the lines of what you're thinking. They started growing in manufacturing. People in Mexico and other countries, it's everywhere for the building of these kinds of systems. Then they started to be used in the home, like vacuum cleaners, Roombas. Anybody have a Roomba? No? I don't either. So. Excuse me. The military in the United States has been funding and using robots as well too. They're used now in healthcare. They're used for taking care of children. I just read today there's one in China that checks children when they're going to school in the morning to see if they're sick. And if they're sick, they tell them to go this way, and otherwise they go that way. So I don't know. That's important. The question is this the right way to do that? Those are the ethical questions. But people are using this technology in all kinds of different ways to help the elderly, for example, in tasks that will ideally preserve their dignity, but in other ways maybe rob them of their dignity. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about the use of the technology. So that's as brief as I can be.
Excellent, thank you. Which would be the top ethical concerns about robots?
Well, everybody has different perspectives. I have 2. The first one is the military use. The United Nations has been discussing for the last 6 years in Geneva lethal autonomous weapon systems. I was engaged in the initial discussions with them, and if you did some of my readings, you may have read some of that as well too. The talks have not gotten very far because people can't agree on definitions. What is an autonomous robot? What is meaningful human control? Non-governmental organizations such as Human Rights Watch and the International Committee on Robot Arms Control and dozens of others are calling for a ban of that technology. I don't know what Mexico's position is. I don't know if they've taken a formal stance or not. You could go to the UN website and you'll find a statement probably from them as to whether Cuba supports a ban, but not necessarily all the others. And there's about 7 or 8 nations which do not currently support a ban, but everybody supports talking about it further, and so do I. So the potential dangers are very real, but the potential dangers for cyber warfare and all these other things are very real as well too. So the discussions are, there's something called international humanitarian law, which deal with the Geneva Conventions and the other things that you may have heard of. And the question is, do these systems comply with that? And if not, what do we need to change? So people are trying to move forward with those discussions. It's been, for those who support the ban, this pace has been very slow from their perspective, if at all. For folks such as myself, which argue that at least we know what we need to define what it is that we're banning before we ban it, that would be helpful, I would think. But I do believe in the regulation of the technology. I mean, it's like you have to use it in certain ways, and the ultimate goal from my point of view is to protect non-combatant life, which if you read about that, that's what the focus of my research is. How can we use this technology to save the innocents that are being slaughtered in the battlefield? So that's number one. The second one is maybe a little more surprising to you from my point of view. It's something that we call intimate robotics. Robots right now are becoming more intimate. You have discussions with your phone. You may have, there's robots have the potential to engage in closer and closer relationships with human beings. I'm not worried about sex robots. Sex robots, I'm not, because sex robots are, people have been using sex toys and sexual artifacts since the beginning of mankind, whether it's rocks or sticks or whatever, people have been using that. So that's nothing new. The danger here is that we start attributing agency to these things, and we start to care for them. And if you start to care for your sex toy, that has the potential for damaging human-human relationships. And so I worry the fact that people are in general embarrassed to talk about that. It's not, remember I talked about how the UN, lots of people are talking about this. Very few people are talking about this, yet these robots are being made and are beginning to move out into the real world. I'm concerned about how it will affect human-human relationships. If you have engaged in intimate relations with a robot, is that adultery? Is it bestiality? What is it? That's it. What does the church think of that as well too? I mean, could you marry a robot? There are people who want to marry robots. They say they're better than people. Why would I want to marry a person? They cause all kinds of trouble. So what's the right answer for that? I don't have the answers for that, but I do believe we need to talk about it and get away from the embarrassment that often engenders and have some meaningful discussions. If you keep in mind that video recording devices initially got propelled, the VCR and the like, DVDs by pornography. The internet got its widespread popularity. I was reading Pornhub is, just today I was reading on the news, that Pornhub is the #7th most visited internet site. It's a tens of billions of dollar industry on the internet, and robotics is not far behind. We don't have the technology to do it effectively, but some people, you go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, you will see some things that you will find surprising, I guess is the best way to put it. And the point is, there's a big market for this. And that's why it's going to develop, whether it's regulated or not. It doesn't mean everybody's going to want one. Doesn't mean 1% of the people will want them. Maybe it means 1/100th of 1% of the people will want them. But think how many people it is. That's a lot of people. And this is men and women. They're doing both in this case. So yeah, no, this is kind of how I feel about it. But that's why we have to talk about it. Yeah, that's the important thing.
Robots must be embodied, or for example, a program that controls an airplane can be considered a robot,
Yeah.
or only if it has a body?
The definitions are always challenging, are they not? Robots, to me, do require a physical embodiment. But one could argue if it's controlling an airplane, it has a physical embodiment. A softbot that's on your phone, for example, like Alexa or Siri, those don't really have the same kind of physical embodiment and the like. And you are the actuator. So if your GPS system tells you, turn right, the car doesn't turn right, unless you turn it right, okay? It says, turn left.
We are the slaves.
That's it. That's exactly correct. You become subservient to the robot. And how often do you blindly do that? You know, often you're driving along and the robot says, your agent says, do this, and you do that. You don't even think about it. It's okay. Sure, my wife gets mad at me because I follow it. And I'm not listening to her. I'm following that thing. Yeah, that can be problematic, certainly. But to answer your question, I view the non-physical embodiments like that as what are referred to as softbots, which are software agents as well too. Now, there's a commonality between software agents and physically embodied agents, and some robotic systems are not really smart, like the ones in the factory floor and the like as well too. They're just more like slaves that just blindly repeat their same motions thousands, if not millions of times a day. But these other systems are smarter and have the ability to do intelligence. So, yeah, that's the distinction to me. So, physical embodiment to me requires a robot. The others we call software agents or agents. Agents actually, if you use the term agents, it can span both the hardware and the software side.
Thank you. Some years ago, the movie Hair spoke just about what you were talking about. Do you think that at present there are people like Phoenix?
Worse. There are people. There was a movie in the made a documentary referred to as Guys and Dolls, and it's not the movie musical Guys and Dolls. It's guys using sex dolls and the like as well too. And there are some examples in there where it's disrupting. This 30-year-old has a relationship with this real doll. I don't know if you've seen those. Have you ever seen the movie Lars and the Real Doll? Real Girl, Lars and the Real Girl. You should see it. He truly cares for it. His father, he still lives at home. He says, my father doesn't understand it, and he refers to them by name. So it can end up being rather disruptive. If you look at Lars and the Real Girl, though, which is a movie, I can't remember exactly the name of the Oscar-nominated and winner actor that was in it. It was an indie. But he falls in love with the real doll, but he didn't pay any attention to any other human beings along the way. So it's used in that case as a bridge back, and instead of being stigmatized by the rest of the people, they're told, accept her. So he brings this doll with him wherever he goes, and his relatives and the community and everyone else welcomes her, and it's just a very bizarre story, but eventually he transitions to a real girl. And it's kind of like how robots are often being used now in the study of autism, or for helping with autism, because it's hard for some autistic children to be able to relate directly with human beings. And these robotic artifacts may be a little less threatening and the like. And the intent is to not replace the human being, but to try and bring them back into the society, using that as a stepping stone.
And how far are we from having robotic companions such as the ones you studied to engage people in being empathic with others and so on?
Yeah, well, there are some already. There's a fur seal out there called Paro, P-A-R-O. It is used in healthcare for the elderly in homes. So if your parents or grandparents or me, when we get taken out to an elder care home, you have a hard time visiting them, you can buy them a robot. It is used and there's something called pet psychotherapy, which is used for criminals and children that are affected, and the elderly as well too, that are suffering from dementia or severe illnesses and vulnerable conditions that they may have. These robots provide not only comfort, and it's a fur seal because no one knows how a fur seal behaves, so it's kind of easy to accept, but it also serves, as pets do, as a social enabler, so that if I was holding a fur seal, you probably want to come up and take a look and try it out, and so it bridges them into a greater community. It's also been shown to alleviate stress physiologically and the like. But there are certain ethicists, Rob Sparrow, for example, in Australia, who argues that this is a fundamental deception. We are working on vulnerable populations, and they are thinking that these are alive. They're not alive. They don't care, but we can make them care. I worked with Aibo and Sony, which is the robot dog that has been developed, re-released just recently. That is intended to be a robot companion. It was very successful in its day. They're pretty expensive, but now they've been re-released, and those are commercially available. So some of them are already here. If you're talking about someone like in Bicentennial Man or in Frank and the Robot, you got a ways to go before that. Humanoids are challenging. It's kind of funny because when you look at a robot dog, when it falls over and tries to get up, everybody thinks that's cute. When you see a humanoid fall over, what a stupid robot. It's just a piece of machinery, but it looks like a person, so you expect that much more from it just because of its shape. And this is the way we think, not necessarily the way the robot works. The big issues are reliability and safety. Getting a robot is one thing, but if you're going to have it around your kids, you don't want it to pinch their fingers. Somebody spent an awful lot of time in safety engineering for that. Bigger companies have that ability. Reliability is the other thing. These systems you don't want to have to take back for getting fixed every week, every month. You want them at least as reliable as your dishwasher or your car. I mean, how would you feel if your companion, your human companion, you had to take back to the doctor? You become a caretaker then instead of a companion. And we want the robots to take care of us rather than us to take care of the robots, I think.
Yeah. And I think this article that I was mentioning, you talk about the modification of behavior through not just that the robot communicates. So do you think that eventually it is a not only a behavior modification, but also personality modification for people? And how ethical, how...
The real question is, how ethical it is depends upon which ethical framework you happen to use. If you're what's called a deontologist, or you could say a Kantian as well too, as one example of rights-based approaches, like Rob Sparrow is, he would argue that human beings have the right to perceive the world as it is. Okay? You fundamentally have that right. So if we're creating machines that you think are alive and are really caring about you, the robots don't care. They do not care. They won't care. But you will think they care, okay? That's the thing. If you talk to your car or you kick your dishwasher or whatever it is, we have this ability to project our feelings onto these things. And that's potentially dangerous and immoral from a deontological perspective. On the other hand, if you're what's referred to as a consequentialist or a utilitarian, you evaluate things by their outcomes. Okay, in other words, is there a greater happiness because of this particular technology? Have we done a good thing because among most of the people there is greater happiness? In that case, it is acceptable. It is moral. That's just two examples. Then there's social justice and equity and virtue ethics and all sorts of different frameworks. So the morality, which is the actual implementation, versus the ethical analysis of those things can widely differ. And one of the things we're studying now, we've just begun a project with colleagues at Penn State University on trying to reconcile the different answers. I mean, the things we don't have answers for, right? Think of these United States, things like abortion, things like capital punishment. What's the right answer, okay? It depends on who you ask. And it may depend what year is it, and what religion you are, and all these different aspects as well too. So different frameworks will come up with different answers. Different cultures will have different answers. Intimate robotics in Japan, no problem. You know, why not? That's perfectly okay. The West, it's kind of creepy to think about that. So who's to say? It's not for roboticists to say what's right or what's wrong, but it's for the world and all the stakeholders, which is pretty much everybody, to try and figure out where are we going to go forward. And we've engaged in these really long and vociferous debates, as I mentioned, on capital punishment or abortion, or even smoking. I mean, are you allowed to smoke in public, or you're not allowed to smoke in public? Well, who's to say, right? I mean, who's to say? Who makes that decision? How is that decision made? Same questions for these kinds of things as well too. So I can't give you hard and fast answers for that.
Okay. What does humanity win or lose when using robots in war?
Well, humanity wins nothing in war, period. So the key thing is to never use any weaponry in war, to never have wars. And I always encourage pacifists to try and, thank you. That was quick. Okay. Try and figure out ways to avoid war. But unfortunately, warfare has persisted since. Oh, okay. Anything else?
Would you like anything?
No, that's okay. They're just off to the rolling start, so I think we keep going. But we've persisted in warfare since the beginning of time, and we still have this propensity, for whatever reasons, they may be different reasons over time, to go out and kill each other. And we've gotten to the point where, okay, we're going to kill each other, and this is the way we're going to do it. And that's what the Geneva Conventions and the like say, that many nations, most nations in the world, have agreed to abide by these laws. And if you do not abide by those laws, you are a war criminal. And it divides it into things like, when is it a just war? When you are entitled to go to war, which is jus ad bellum, versus how do you fight when you're in war, which is jus in bello. This goes back to St. Augustine many, many years ago, and just war theory and the like, which is what Western civilization has developed in this and has been accepted worldwide, largely. But not by everybody. Obviously, there are many people that don't fight. Non-state actors, for example, ISIS, and the Taliban and others as well too, or even in Africa, many places. War crimes are committed daily. It's horrific. And so the real question is, and there's a debate on this as well too, is to how is this technology going to affect humanity if it does get out there? And I believe it will. I believe it's inevitable, partly because much of this technology is already out there. By my definition, lethal autonomous weapon systems already exist, whether they be anti-tank mines or the Patriot missile system or the Phalanx system on Aegis-class cruisers, a whole bunch of different things. Any fire and forget system, if you fire something up and it's looking around for a target and it engages that target without asking anybody else, because it better do it quick because there's no time for the humans to do it, that's an autonomous system, at least by my definition. And so how do we manage and control that, and what are the gains? It's not just, to me, about winning wars, and this is what I have to remind the military about sometimes as well too. This technology will help you win wars. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's something called revolutions in military affairs, like battleships and gunpowder and the crossbow and aircraft carriers. They fundamentally change the way in which wars will be fought. And this technology will change the way wars will be fought as well. But how do we ensure, from my point of view, that we do not increase and ideally decrease the number of non-combatant casualties in the battle space? I believe that these systems can potentially reduce those casualties and collateral damage in general, if used appropriately in narrow, certain bounded circumstances, and developed and released into the battle space carefully and effectively. Under those conditions, I believe they can add humanitarian value. If they are not done that way, you've got another weapon that is just adding to the chaos in the battle space. So they need to be regulated, they need to be managed and controlled. But I do not support what's called a preemptive ban, largely now, because I believe in certain cases these systems can protect non-combatants better. And part of the issue is that we need to use technology to protect non-combatants. Because look at the news. I mean, every day, everywhere. Look at any conflict, Syria, take your pick. More non-combatants die in those things than combatants, by far. And we have to use technology to reduce those numbers. I like to say eliminate those numbers, but I don't think that's possible. But if we can do that, to me, there becomes a moral imperative to deploy this technology to that end. But that's not to say the technology couldn't be used in ways that are dystopian or potentially hazardous to humanity as well too. But the way we've managed that in the past is through the creation of appropriate laws and appropriate regulations and criminalizing certain types of activities. We should make sure that that's the case as well too. It's really strange because things like the one proactive preemptive ban that ever existed or ever came into creation, because before I tell you what that is, the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is in charge of the Geneva Conventions, always has said they're one war behind. So the technology is banned after it's been used the first time. Oh, that was bad. We better ban that. The only time they got ahead of it was with blinding lasers. They decided to ban, and they got all the nations on board to prohibit blinding lasers. Strange, because I'm a bit cynical in why that was done as opposed to some of the other things. Keep in mind, again, blinding lasers create a lot of blind soldiers. And what happens when those soldiers come home? You have to take care of them. I hate to think that the nations would rather have someone shot in the eye than blinded. I think the soldier would pick blinding over being shot in that case, but that was an interesting mustering point. The most recent, I think, effective ban on technology, which is after the fact with cluster munitions and the like, although that's not in the Geneva Convention, some of those in Ottawa Accords or other accords as well too. So that's a rather long-winded, and I was going to tell you, wasn't I? It was blinding lasers, I think that was what I said I was going to tell you, the first and only proactive example to date. But others are arguing for that. And there's also, in the Geneva Conventions, since its very beginning, there's something referred to as the Martens Clause, which has never been used. But it says, basically, if a weapon system violates the dictates of the public conscience, whatever that means, if it violates the public conscience, it can be banned just on the basis that, it's not a good thing, okay? But no one knows how to effectively measure the public conscience, and how much of the public conscience does it take. So it's never been used, but some of the NGOs that I mentioned earlier are trying to rally behind that. And you know, if people find it utterly and wholly unacceptable as a technology, maybe it should be banned. And if the approaches and ideas that I put forward in terms of regulating this technology, and others as well too, cannot be achieved, I could be in support of a ban. But I'm in support more now of what's called a moratorium, which says, let's not ban it yet. We may find ways to use it, but let's not deploy it fast at this point in time. Let's think about it and not use it yet, is the key.
Thank you. About deception in robots, how do you manage not deceiving while being in war, for example? It's impossible, right?
Well, nothing's impossible, but you don't do anything. You just stand up and get shot. That would be one way to avoid it. Camouflage, for example, is a form of deception. And there are certain types of, and Sun Tzu, again, they said that all warfare is deception in the art of war. Machiavelli said it's noble and laudable. in the battlefield, detestable in everything else, which is surprising coming from Machiavelli. But deception is fundamental to warfare. There are certain things that are illegal and criminal about deception. For example, you cannot feign that you are wounded in the battlefield. So if you're pretending you've been shot and then you get up and shoot somebody, you're a war criminal under those circumstances. Ruses like that are illegal, but doing things like ambushes or feints, demonstrating strength here and you're going around this way, perfectly legal. They've been doing that for centuries, millennia. Go back, read the Bible about it.
And robots should be deceiving?
Well, should they be, or could they be? You're asking me to make a moral judgment on that. Can they serve as a part of a military and in military actions? I believe they can. But they should comply again in a manner that is consistent with the laws of modern warfare. And if they don't, they should not be used. Certain things are allowable. Should additional laws be created with respect to this technology? Maybe so. Maybe not. But we don't have the answers for that. We can't even define what it is that we're talking about at this point, which is not uncommon because the word autonomous actually comes from philosophy. And philosophy refers to an autonomous agent as something that has moral agency and free will. Okay? You have moral agency. You're responsible for your actions, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Sure. You have free will, at least you think, to be able to make your own choices and be responsible for those as well. Robots don't have either of those, and they're not likely to have either of those for a long time. That requires a whole different set of capabilities. So when you get the philosophical discussions, they say these robots don't exist yet. We need to ban them. But you're right, they don't exist yet. But if you want me to ban the Terminator, I agree. Okay, no Terminators. Those are robots that have free will and moral agency. They could pick whoever they wanted to kill and kill them any way that they wanted to do it for whatever reason that they wanted. Isn't that free will? And the Terminator always was responsible, right? No one said it was, they said Skynet, I guess, or that had it. But somewhere, you can go up the chain of command, right, and find who was responsible for that. So we often talk at cross purposes as well. And so I try and hope that people will talk in concrete systems and say, okay, this is the system, this is the mission, is this acceptable? And if it's not acceptable, then what do we do to make it acceptable? Or should it just be banned outright? That's, to me, a better way to move forward is to work with example kinds of systems. And there are many systems that are being built today because of the lack of regulation. And whether they're ultimately going to be legal or not is an entirely different question if the law changes. But right now, any weaponry that is developed must comply to Article 36, must comply to the development of international humanitarian law. So there are guidelines. And if you're complicit with the creation of fundamentally unethical systems, you are in violation.
Okay. And now, looking at the other way around, should robots have rights?
I'm not there yet. We read. There's lots of things that philosophers talk about. I noted that in this conference, I don't think there was any of the philosophers that were there were talking about robot rights as well too. But I have my students read about robot rights and the like. I'm not worried about that because I don't believe they should have them yet. There's two cases really. One is when you think they are sufficiently sentient, they're not sentient, but when you think, remember we talked about the perception of these things? When you think they are sufficiently sentient, maybe if you start seeing someone rip them apart and kicking them, do you remember the movie AI? Did you see the movie AI? Remember that place where they were torturing robots and the like? Were those sentient robots? I don't know what a sentient robot really is, but you felt for those robots, right? You think that's wrong. That is wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. If people take an Aibo and kick it, is that okay? Would you feel for that? There's a video I show my class. Any of you know what a Pleo robot is? It's a dinosaur robot about this big. A dinosaur. It's a dinosaur. But it's a dinosaur. and they have a video of people torturing this robot. So they beat it, and it starts to squirm and squeal, and it makes you feel very uncomfortable. The robot's not feeling anything. Are you mistreating a robot under those circumstances? I worry about the impact it has on the person that's doing that rather than the robot itself. And when if you think you're infringing on the rights and you find that's okay, and that translates over to human beings, that is potentially problematic. So that's one case where rights may be attributable to them. But I wouldn't say it's the same as normal human rights. The other case is if and when, and God knows when this will be, if ever, they should become sentient and have emotions and feelings. And by the way, I have patents in robot emotions. Emotions, okay? They're not real emotions. They're things that you will think are emotions. At that point in time, people argue that they should. And keep in mind, again, corporations have rights right now. There's a river in New Zealand that has rights. Personhood has personhood. So you can grant rights. Even animals have rights as well too, right? So you can grant rights to whoever or whatever it is that you like. And some societies may do it before others. The reason in New Zealand they didn't want the river polluted, or they had to protect it. So one way is give it personhood. Okay, this is our river, and it has certain rights. So it's a question of what it is those rights are trying to accomplish as well. I do not want robots, for example, to ultimately be slaves, not because of the robots, but because I believe that will set humanity's perception of slavery back to what it used to be. And we don't need to be thinking that way. It took us thousands and thousands of years to get out of that mentality, and we don't want to create a new class of slaves. But the point is, there are many people that disagree with my point of view. So Joanna Bryson, who's a good friend and a colleague, we worked on some things together, wrote a paper called "Robots Should Be Slaves." Okay? We should always think of them as slaves. They are not human beings. And she argues to try and make it transparent that they are fundamentally machines. But as I mentioned before, we have this tendency to think about these things in what are called anthropomorphic terms. We will attribute agency to them even when they don't deserve it. What's the right answer? Ask Joanna, ask me, we'll give you different answers.
Okay. And what was your reaction when Robert was granted citizenship?
Is that the answer?
Yeah, we get it.
Yeah, what was her name again? The robot?
Sophia?
Sophia.
It's Sophia.
Yeah, it was Sophia.
Saudi Arabia.
I know. Saudi Arabia as well too. Hanson Robotics was the company that made that particular platform. That's a nice platform. It's a good platform. We actually have a couple of Hanson robots in our laboratory, not that sophisticated. What worries me is that was granted rights that women in Saudi Arabia don't even have. So is that fundamentally wrong? But when you're an ethicist as well too, which lives above the level of morality, do we have the right to superimpose our beliefs, our nation's beliefs, or our culture's belief on other cultures? God knows Mexico has suffered in its history from Europeans and others imposing their points of view, the Catholic Church, all those others, trying to help you and trying to save you in each and every case. Well, maybe in some cases taking gold, but in other cases trying to reform you in their image. Nation building, the United States is guilty of that as well too. Historically in Latin America, look what we have done in the past. So who's to say? I think we have to, is it wrong for Saudi Arabia to do that? Who am I to say? That's the real thing. I can understand the arguments, and I can make arguments that repression of women under any sets of circumstances is wrong, and that there is a fundamental human right associated with that. So I'm sympathetic to those sorts of things. But should we impose democracy on everyone? Or should the communists, as they tried, to impose communism on everyone? All for the good of the world, right? It's the same thing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if we have like 5 more minutes for other questions.
Whatever, I don't know when I'm supposed to be back, so I haven't finished my coffee yet.
That's excellent. So if anybody wants to ask any questions.
So do you think ethicists will have a lot of work in the future, in what is to come?
I think so. Even right now, driverless cars.
Mhm.
We
Yes.
talked about those as well too. What are you going to do with that?
Yes.
Okay, the impact of that technology is potentially severe. About God knows you have how many cabs do you have in Mexico City? It looks like every other car. I just came from New York, and then I see Mexico City, and I thought New York was bad in terms of the numbers of taxis that you have. What if all those people are put out of work? What are you going to do then? Because you have more safer, faster, more efficient driving capabilities, and nobody's got a job. Is that a good thing? And then the question becomes, there's two questions really. The first one is the classic ethics question, which is the trolley problem. Should I protect my life above others if I'm about to get in an accident? And how many others? You know, if it's just me or it's 5 people, what should the car do under those circumstances? But more significantly, and I can use this just in driving over here today, should the robot, the driverless car, follow the law to the letter, or should it follow social norms, the way people normally drive? And people don't follow the law in Mexico City.
No. How many minutes did it take you to?
I've been here many times before. I mean, I haven't seen people driving on the sidewalks yet, but I've seen in the past. But so it actually seems more civilized than I remember. But I was in Egypt in between, and they are even worse. Hard to believe, right? But it's true.
Greece is even worse.
Yeah, Greece is bad. Go to Egypt. Have you been to Egypt?
Yes.
Okay, and they're really bad.
India, yeah.
I've been to India too. Not the worst parts of India, but I've been to other parts. So there's bad places. But the real question is, now imagine you put driverless cars into the mix. All those taxis were suddenly driverless. And they stopped at every red light. And they followed the speed limit. And they obeyed every single law. How do you think everyone else who was driving the road would feel? They'd probably get pretty angry, right? Don't you want to follow that car that's going through the red light? It's a long wait after this as well, too. In Atlanta, don't record this. This is North America. I occasionally speed. Everyone in Atlanta speeds as well, too. And the point is, it keeps the traffic flow. In Georgia, there is a law called the Slowpoke Law, that if you're on the freeway and you're in the fast lane and you're doing the speed limit, right at the speed limit, you can get a ticket. Because they found that cars that go in there and are blocking faster traffic cause road rage, cause cars to weave around and increase the number of accidents that are occurring there. Human beings are very impatient. I don't know if you know that or not. But so there's all these kinds of secondary and tertiary questions associated with this, and that's making interesting work for philosophers and roboticists alike. But it's also how are we going to create policies? How are we going to create laws? Lawyers are going to have a field day with this as well too. When self-driving cars start killing people.
And the distribution of the guilt. I mean, how guilty?
About that. No, I mean actually, who is guilty in that particular?
Right.
Guilty, but doesn't feel guilty.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. Oh yes, you did. It's too bad you got to do it. Yeah. So how does that manage? You're right. The responsibility is what we refer to that as well too. And civil and financial responsibility, all those sorts of things. And who's going to create the policies as well too? Are you? You going to create the policy? You should. Get engaged. You need to get engaged with these sorts of things as well too. So everyone needs to be a part of that. And if you let other people do it, you might not like the outcomes. So try and stay apart.
Do you think that it's a good idea that every student has a little knowledge about programming and robotics, or only who are interested in science and technology?
Good question. I would say the former rather than the latter. I mean, computation right now is important in almost every discipline. Whether if you're a poet, you might use a word checking thing as well too. Suppose you could create something that evaluates it compared to other forms of prose and other things as well too. If you're a social scientist, you need it for data analysis and the like, unless you really like doing numbers by hand. I believe you need at least one course to get an understanding of what computation is, and it's also a way of thinking as well too. Now, that's not to say that that's the only way of thinking, far from it, but it is useful in your studies to look at different ways of approaching problems, and a computational one is one of those ways to do. So I would argue that computer literacy at the very least, and computational literacy, understanding how computation is done, is important. That doesn't mean you have to become a computer scientist, but it is important to understand, to take the magic out of it. Some people think this is all magic, right? Any technology that's not well understood is considered magic. I think Kubrick said that. So you don't want to think this is magic. It's not magic. But if you take it to a bunch of people and they don't understand it and it's doing magical things, so to speak, could be potentially misled. So you don't want to be one of them.
Right. What do you think is the future for robotics? What would be the future for robotics? For humanity?
Okay, well, I'm glad you put that caveat on that as well too, because I don't invest in robot stocks, for example, and like 5 other robot companies just went bankrupt, even though they were well financed. A tendency for roboticists is to have great ideas. I know what the world is going to need. I know what you're going to need, and I'm going to build it, and you're going to use it. And I get money, and I build it, and you don't use it. This is a chronic problem, the arrogance of our discipline as well too. Sometimes they're ahead of their time, or whatever the reason is, but I've seen so many companies fail. The future of robotics for humanity. It's like saying, I got a forked road like this, okay? Which one should I take? There's truly dystopian futures. There are, in other words, it's going to be the end of humanity and existential threats, which the singularity folks say for, and they're all going to kill us in the end. Remember we started at the beginning with that same vision as well too? Or there's a utopian view, I'll never have to work again, my life will be leisure, I won't have to take any computer science courses, I can just write poetry and do whatever it is that I think I want, anywhere I want, and it'll all be taken care of for me. There's a lot of things in between there as well too. We may destroy ourselves with some of the other things, we may enhance life, and people may live longer, and it's probably some mix of all this stuff that's going to happen.
But not all Hollywood movies.
Not the Terminator. I don't think
Not the Terminator.
Not the Terminator, right? I don't. You see, in waging war again, you have whole war robot armies fighting against humanity. The militaries aren't interested in that, but
maybe the bicentenary men.
the bicentenary. That's again rising up to rights and fighting for their own rights as well too. So, like go to Frank and the Robot, I guess as well too. Frank and the Robot, which is an interesting use of healthcare robot. If you're not going to see it, if you're going to see it, cover your ears right now, but I'll give you a little bit about the plot of that. The father starts to become a little bit senile. He's living by himself, and he wants to stay in his house, so his son buys him a robot. It's a small humanoid robot, and it's there to take care of him and to help him and make him feel good. He hates it from the very beginning. He doesn't want it. It's making him eat his vegetables. It's doing all these things that you would want your parents to do if someone was taking care of them, whether it's a human caregiver or otherwise. But they also find out he was a jewel thief in the past. And so some rich people are treating him very poorly. So he teaches the robot, which is programmed to make him feel good and to do what he wants and make it a utilitarian perspective in his case, to do the things that he would like. So the robot starts to become his assistant in conducting robberies as well. And eventually they figure it out. They recognize he's the jewel thief, and they say, okay, we're taking your robot as evidence, but the robot has to destroy his own memory, and all memory of everything about Frank. This is a privacy issue, of course, right? I mean, but if you can subpoena or that evidence to be used against you, it's not like your wife or husband that can't testify you in a court of law. The robot can't testify you. It's been recording everything that you've done. So the robot is completely wiped out after that. Not destroyed, but its memory is destroyed. So there's issue of privacy as well, too, associated with that. So I don't know what the answer is for this stuff, but what the movies do is ask the interesting ethical questions, because they don't talk about the everyday stuff. That's what the researchers do. It's the boundary conditions and the unusual things, which is very helpful for society because it pushes that up and makes us think about those things. And it's often entertaining as well.
We are talking about the relationships to human or robotic to human.
Yeah.
Actually, for the woman professional, will it be more comfortable take a relationship to the robotic?
Well, that's a good question. There is a piece I did with CNN News. It's called I Love You Bot. You can find it on the internet, CNN and I Love You Bot. It's on YouTube. It had 3 parts to it. I was stuck in the middle as a commentator, and some people said I was the only rational voice in the whole thing, which is surprising for me. But the very first story, there was a French woman who was building a robot that she could marry. They're dead serious as well too. She was in a couple of failed relationships, and she said, well, maybe I don't like people all that much. So she was building this to be her companion. So people are potentially doing that. We kind of look at it as weird. But if you look at one of Asimov's major stories, Susan Calvin, who was the first roboticist, by the way, who was a woman, she created a robot that was her loving companion as well too. So fictionally it's not impossible. Actually, it's potentially possible. Will it be widespread? Who knows? I don't know. What if you could create a robot lover that is better than a human being? It was interesting. I used to ask a bunch of Italian women, expecting a different answer at cocktail parties, that talking about these kinds of things. Would you want a robot partner? He said, in a minute. It would listen to me. It would take care of me. It would massage when I wanted. It would do all these sorts of things as well too. Can we build robots that potentially do better than human beings in that case? Maybe so. Can we make them as reliable as they have to be as well too? That's the other thing. So they don't break down every other week. That's the harder part.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there a close collaboration between philosophers and scientists and engineers for studying the ethics about technology?
Good question, and that's why I'm here. There is the International Association of Computing and Philosophy is holding its conference at the Philosophy Research Building, the Institute for Philosophia Research, here on campus right now. I'm skipping the sections. I hope you don't get mad at me.
For a good cause.
Yes.
Exactly, and I gave my talk this morning as well too, so that's good as well too. It's good, not as good as it should be. It's kind of interesting because most technologists often don't care about the social impacts. It takes a while to learn and recognize the responsibility, and part of my mission is to raise consciousness in technologists as well too. Philosophers are interested in everything, so it's not hard to get them
That's
engaged.
not the case.
Yeah. So, but there are major efforts. There's something by the IEEE, which is the largest largest professional society in the world. I don't know, 40,000 people or something like that in computation and electrical engineering and electronic engineering. And they just came out with what's it called? The Global Initiative on Ethical Aspects of Intelligent and Autonomous Systems. Big book about this. I was involved with some of that as well too. And it talks about a whole bunch of different aspects of the problem. Oh, okay. Happy birthday.
This is something called peanuts.
Okay. People are becoming more and more responsive. When I first started talking about robot ethics around 2003, 2004, there were maybe a dozen people that were really interested in the robotic side of things. There were a few more in technology and science in general and ethics. Now, because the technology is so far advanced, There are so many meetings and so many voices out there talking. It's hard. It's like a cacophony. There's all these different ideas. So we have to find ways to bring the voices together. But it's much better that more people are talking about it than nobody's talking about it as well too. So people are waking up in terms of trying to engineer the futures for themselves from an ethical perspective as well.
Well, thank you so very much.
You're most
Un
welcome.
gran aplauso.
Okay.